I have got the hotspot connected as well, so if internet drops out,
And
it
I
should go
and I
over.
think we just went live. So, guys, welcome to the F1 Fanatics race live stream. Again, you've got Ash on screen. You got me on screen as well. Stephen's not here for this one, and we've just seen a crazy end to the Styrian Grand Prix. Obviously, the second of the back-to-back races at Austria. Wow, it was. It certainly was a little bit of a crazy ending there, wasn't it, Ash? Oh, I'm not sure if we've lost Ash. Da-da-da-da-da-da. I think we've lost Ash. So for now, you've got me on screen in terms of that. I'll see if we can try and get Ash back in the stream. But, so, race, crazy end. Lewis Hamilton wins the Grand Prix after last week struggling and not having things go his way. He manages to get his first win of the season. Valtteri Bottas making it Mercedes 1-2, and that Mercedes car really does look far superior to the rest of the cars on the field. Max Verstappen, a very solid P3, ran most of the race in P2, but suffered a little bit of damage on his front wing, which maybe cost him and allowed Bottas to catch him a lot quicker. And we'll go through basically how we do things on these race live streams. I'll go through here. I'll try and get Ashley back in terms of some form as we go along. If not, I'll end the stream and we'll get something there. I think Ash is coming back now from that. But yeah, we'll run through the thing. Hello, Ash. Are you back? I think we've got Ash back.
I'm back if you can hear me.
There we go. I can hear you. Perfect. Okay, so we've got Ash back. But yes, I'll just run through the race running order that was officially classified. So I'll go from 20 to 1. So, well, I'll go from first and then go through to the retirees. So Lewis Hamilton has his first win of the F1 2020 season, coming in P1. Valtteri Bottas in P2, which still has him in the lead of the 2020 championship as things stand, because obviously Lewis Hamilton finished P4 when Bottas won last week. Verstappen in P3 with his Red Bull teammate finishing in P4, but he was quite a long way behind his teammate Max Verstappen in the race and wasn't really in a competitive race at all. So that wasn't a particularly good race from Alex Albon. Lando Norris starting the last lap in P7, somehow managed to get P5. Perez had been chasing Albon down, went for a late move at turn 4. Albon was on the outside, and then this time he closed the door. Perez lost his front wing, or got his front wing damaged, which meant that he lost a lot of time, making him that he was able to get to the end, finishing in P6. Lance Stroll finished P7, making it 6 and 7 for Racing Point. A very good kind of dry race for them, considering that in the wet weather they struggled a lot. Well, they both finished outside of Q3, where they'd obviously in the first week managed to both get into Q3. So they struggled there. Daniel Ricciardo in P8, managing to finish the race this week, and much better for him. Carlos Sainz in P9. Daniel Kvyat P10, rounding off the points. Kimi Raikkonen P11, Kevin Magnussen P12, Grosjean P13, Giovinazzi P14 and Gasly P15. George Russell, having started P11, went wide at the start, dropping down to the back, but managed to overtake his teammate Nicholas Latifi, finishing P16. And Latifi was the last of the classified finishers in P17. Ocon retired with an overheating problem, I think it was, and then Leclerc and Vettel both retired after Leclerc went for a move from the inside of turn 3 on the first lap. Hit the apex, bumped over the back of Sebastian Vettel's car, taking out Sebastian Vettel's rear wing, ending his race. But also with that bump over the apex, he damaged his flooring beyond repair, and Charles Leclerc's race was ended as well, making it an even worse weekend for Ferrari than what it looked like last week would be. Last week they got a podium and a points finish for Vettel. This week they were the first two retirees of the race. So a really kind of poor finish for those guys. But Ash, I'm going to go for you. Thoughts on the second Austrian GP race of the season?
Well, I think we're safe to say it's how we predicted it would be. Hamilton and Verstappen being the two that were fighting for the win, if you can really call it a fight, and everyone else being kind of casual and taking it easy within the midfield for most of the race. But the battles that we saw at the beginning and at the end, yeah, it was a very good race apart from that middle, I would say probably about 20, 25 laps. So, yeah, what about you?
I think the most exciting point in that middle part was probably Sergio Perez making his way through the field. But yeah, absolutely, it seemed it was just a chasing pack. And as soon as, Mercedes pitted for the mediums, Max pitted for the mediums, it kind of felt like an inevitable Mercedes 1-2. But the midfield battles were good, but it just kind of how it ended in there. I've got the chat up now on the phone, so hi to Liam, hi to Rox, hi to Josh, hi to JB. JB saying what a great race, some of those battles were sick. There was some brilliant wheel-to-wheel action certainly during that race. Lance Stroll, fantastic overtake on Daniel Ricciardo at the end. It was a shame for him he couldn't make it stick and Lando Norris got the move, but Lando Norris, incredible ending. What was it? Sergio Perez wheel-to-wheel fight, I think, with his teammate Lance Stroll. It was Valtteri Bottas before he overtook Verstappen the lap before. Max's kind of wheel-to-wheel, that was probably the highlight of the race for me. Max's defence coming into turn 4, then taking Bottas on the outside of turn 4, holding his nerve and coming out on top of that. That was incredible. We've also got Tonka Toy Track back in the chat again, and I think that's it, and Abe as well. But yeah, what do you make of those battles, Ash? I think they were absolutely fantastic. I would say the on-track action and on-track battles were a lot better than last week.
Yeah, I was surprised that the front runners started with the softs. As I said yesterday, I was expecting them to go mediums, but it did give us a good start to the race. Sainz definitely pushing both Verstappen and Bottas there. It would have been nicer to have seen Hamilton and Verstappen be a little bit closer, but Perez coming through the field, all three of us said it yesterday that he was going to make up places. I don't think any of us predicted that he would make that many places up. Lando Norris once again showing that he's up for a scrap whenever. Ricciardo and Ocon, I feel that Renault there may have made a slight mistake in their calculations. Definitely should have been letting Ricciardo pass sooner, but good battling from both of them. I just think we needed a bit more in that middle part with some of these battles. But once again, Lando Norris, brilliant final lap.
Yeah, it was incredible. And, he loves Austria. His career finishes at Austria have been P6 in his first season. Last week, obviously, he got that podium and he finished P5 today. So he's never finished outside the top 6 in Austria for Lando Norris. So he's probably saying, can we race here every week? And it was another incredible performance from the McLaren driver, and certainly good to finish ahead of both Racing Points. I mean, let's be fair. If the front wing of Perez hadn't come into play, then he was only going to finish ahead of Lance Stroll in the Racing Point. But to finish ahead of both is a fantastic result for the McLarens, I think. Although Carlos Sainz being down in P9, the medium compound, I think he said he pushed too hard and he kind of was dropping. And it's obviously Lando Norris beat Carlos Sainz as a teammate last year in qualifying, but does it look like that Lando Norris has overtaken Carlos Sainz in the race as well, in terms of, I mean, I know this is a track that suits Lando more and he beat Carlos at last year, but he's certainly looking the stronger out of the two McLaren drivers so far.
I would say it's more Lando's been gradually improving on following up his qualifying performances. So, yes, he obviously had the grid penalty today, but let's not forget he did qualify sixth, which really is ahead of where the McLaren should be if you think about this normal lineup in Formula One. We would normally have the Ferraris up there. Racing Point would normally be up there as well. So he is still qualifying well, but he is backing it up on a Sunday, which is something that we said definitely needed to improve at the start of last season. Sainz, in all honesty, I wouldn't really put it past him to say he's potentially got Ferrari at the back of his mind as well. And he's probably looking at things, thinking to himself, I've messed up with that contract here.
It is. It's very unlikely Ferrari have a poor car 2 years in a row, but I certainly, if I was looking at the two teams and in terms of a happy place, I know which team I would certainly want to be in. From there's a few things in chat. Real Ben Holmes has come into the chat as well, having Lando had him cheering out of his seat from there. A question from JB. Do you think Stroll will get a penalty with Ricciardo? I hope not, as Stroll's in his fantasy team. And also Tonka Toy Truck reckons he didn't hit Ricciardo, so it's not a foul from there. But yeah, Josh was saying the pass wasn't really legal. What was your take on that kind of? That obviously Lance sent it and forced Ricciardo wide. But yeah, basically he kind of almost sent it, stopped it on the racing line, and made the move, didn't he? Which obviously led to Lando Norris being able to come in and snatch it on both of them.
Yeah, looking at that, I would say that is more of a penalty than Hamilton's last week. Hamilton's last week you can argue was potentially a racing incident because of the understeer. There, Lance Stroll was literally dived up the inside and made it impossible for Ricciardo to turn in at all. So it's one of those where he is forcing a driver off of the track. But, no contact made. Is it going to be one where they're going to look at it and say it was last lap of the race, we'll let this one slide? But yeah, personally, I think he will get a penalty for that.
I think it'll be interesting to see whether he gets a penalty or not. But what I think's really good, actually, is I think this proves, what car you're in or how competitive your car is massively changes your opinion of what kind of people think a driver is capable of doing. Because obviously Lance Stroll has been he's only in it for daddy's money. And look, Lance Stroll is by no means one of the best drivers on the grid, but he's certainly shown that now that Racing Point is definitely competitive and he has a car to compete with his rivals. He's certainly showing that he can at least hold his own in Formula One, and he doesn't look like a terrible driver that's not deserving to be in the sport.
No, and I'd also say he does seem to have mellowed out quite a bit. Like, yes, we had the move at the end on Ricciardo, but there's not a lot of him tripping up over the front wings of other drivers that we've seen in the past from him. Admittedly, we have only had 2 races this season, so he might just have got lucky with those 2. But it is one of those where he does appear to have calmed down within the races themselves, because that was his issue. It was almost he needed to make a move the minute he got to the back of a car, otherwise there was something wrong and something would happen. At the moment, it appears as if he is willing to run behind a car for a little while and just identify where the best place to make the move actually is.
Yeah, and I think we're going to stick on Racing Point and also bring Red Bull into the equation as well, because we'll talk about Mercedes, because Mercedes, we'll talk about them later in the stream, and Ferrari in terms of 2 different fortunes of well, traditionally top teams within the sports. Obviously, Mercedes, you can only really can't really classify Ferrari as a top team this season, I think, on early showings. But Sergio Perez starting P17 and finishing P6. It looked like for a long while it would be P5 and potentially even P4. And attempting to go for P4, he lost P5. But still a fantastic race for him. And then obviously we'll talk about the kind of differing fortunes of the Red Bull driver of Alexander Albon. What a difference a week can make in terms of everyone feeling sorry for him last week and this week for me. A lot of big questions have to be asked of Alex Albon. But we'll start off with Sergio Perez. And driver of the day, for me, he's my driver of the day. Absolutely fantastic performance from the Mexican.
Yeah, it was really good to see him getting places throughout the race, and it was a consistent improvement in his position. So there wasn't all of them all at once and then settling into the race. He was always picking up places, and yeah, he always knew that when he was pitting, he was going to have to try and overtake again, but you didn't really doubt him at that point. It was one of those where you knew that if he got behind a car, he would be able to find a position to make a place up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with Sergio and that racing point, it now feels like what we would view the Red Bull, Ferraris or Mercedes maybe not Mercedes, because Mercedes are in a different level of their own compared to others. But if, like, say, a Red Bull or Ferrari started at the back in the 2019 season, you'd expect them to make their way in the field and make their way into the top six. And that's exactly what Sergio's done. He was just kind of cutting through past everyone so easily. It was pretty incredible to see, I think, on that front. And it was very impressive from Sergio Perez, that drive. And he's always I think he's highly rated within the midfield, and now that he's got a car beneath him, he really is making the most of those performances, and was unlucky. He had to go for it, I think, on Alexander Albon late on the race, the chance to get P4. P5 and P6 or P7 it would have ended up for the racing points, would have still been very good. But to beat a Red Bull from P17, that would have been a serious statement by Racing Point. And I think this is obviously Racing Point rebranding as Aston Martin this year. I think they feel like they'll comfortably finish top of or best of the rest this season. But it is going to be kind of, if they could have made that statement and beat a Red Bull from starting P17, that would have shown how far their car has come, and that would have been incredible.
Yeah, it would have been, but it does show that last year's Mercedes was very fast, wasn't it? So it is one of those where that's the sort of thing that will come this season. If teams around them don't take the step up, then they're going to run away with that best of the rest battle that looks as if it could end up being for third place in the championship.
Absolutely, which is mental to think come the start of the season, because I think we all thought in testing that Ferrari weren't great, but I don't think we think they would be as poor as this. But seen a few things. JB saying Perez was good, but with the Albon was a bit dodgy. His driver of the day was Norris. Josh was saying that he's watched the move again and thinks it's pretty cut and dry that it will be a penalty for Stroll because he's basically missed the corner, went off track and forced Ricciardo off as well. Rox has jokingly said Leclerc driver of the day. Well, I suppose oh god, Ferrari, we will get onto that. Oh no, looks like Liam's phone's going to die as well. Hopefully he can stay with us or get a charge on that front. But Alexander Albon, last week, obviously Max Verstappen retired earlier. The focus was on him and the team. He was comfortably maintaining podium position with the safety car, and then we all know what happened with that attempt on the move with Lewis Hamilton, spun and lost out on the race. This week, I don't know how far it was in the end. I think with Verstappen's front wing damage it wouldn't be, but at some point I think it was at about 30 seconds that he was off Max Verstappen. He was nowhere with the Mercedes, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But to be so far off Max Verstappen and, like we said, to almost lose P4 to the Racing Point, uh, I mean, Alex Albon needs to be worried, I think, because that pace isn't good enough. That's not going to be something that's going to keep him the Red Bull seat if this is what's to come from Alexander Albon in the season.
Yeah, I think he ended. It was about 10 or 11 seconds, wasn't it, that he was behind? But with that, you have got Verstappen's front wing, and he went in for a pit stop as well. So it's one of those where you look at it and he hasn't performed well. And I've just seen JB's comment, and that was something that I was going to say as well. He may have been far off of the pace, but he has finished where Red Bull are going to be wanting him. So you don't. JB is exactly right with that comment. You don't get points for times; you get points for positions. So yes, it is one of those where he does need to be getting closer to Bottas 100%. But in terms of Verstappen, you know that there's going to be times where he's going to just run away with things. The two hardest seats in Formula One at this moment in time are Bottas's and Albon's, because you don't want to be the teammate of Hamilton or Verstappen, because in all honesty, they are the top two drivers on the grid, and you could put Leclerc into that battle as well if the Ferrari was anywhere near the performance that you'd get from them.
Yeah, I mean, JB's comments are a very good point. He's finished where he's expected to. But the problem is, Red Bull, when they had Daniel Ricciardo, had two drivers who were pushing at the front, and they could then dictate strategy. What makes Verstappen's life doubly hard at the moment is the fact that he's fighting two Mercedes single-handedly. Basically, he's got to see if Red Bull can get anywhere close to Mercedes in a race and fight, which at the moment it doesn't seem like he can. He can beat Bottas on pace, but he can't really keep up with Lewis Hamilton's Merc. But Bottas can be used in any sort of circumstance. They can afford to be careful with his strategy because they don't have to worry about his teammates. So I just think he's got to up his game. And a lot of people said that Pierre Gasly got deserved to drop, and admittedly he did. From the performances he was doing. But I think we've got to see more from Alexander Albon here if he's going to keep this Red Bull seat. Look, it's early in the season, but from what I've seen from Alexander Albon, he does what he needs to do. But do Red Bull want a driver that does what he needs to do? Or do they need a driver who's going to be pushing with Max Verstappen and putting pressure on Mercedes in races? Because at the moment, I can't see Alexander Albon doing any of that sort unless there's safety cars in play and Red Bull nail the strategy like they did last week, which Albon wasn't able to take advantage of.
Yeah, the one thing I would say on that is if we go back to the Red Bull of the first half of last season, Gasly doesn't keep that place to Perez. Perez gets past, and then you potentially lose places to the likes of Norris and Stroll as well. But Albon is being used at this moment in time as a driver who is there to be getting in and around the podium and to pick up places where the likes of Bottas or Hamilton have failures. So I don't know how much Red Bull are looking at Albon as being a top point scorer at this moment in time. I think it is one of those where they're wanting to get the points for Verstappen to be able to challenge for a championship, but know that they've got a driver that's going to be finishing in positions that is likely to keep them in contention for a Constructors' Championship at this moment in time.
Yeah. I think he is doing the bare minimum than what's expected, but I still think I haven't. When I thought about it, we spoke about it. When I thought about it more come the end of last year, everyone was saying what an incredible job that Alex Albon did. I think he did a good job. He did a better job than Gasly. But is a better job than what Gasly did in Red Bull enough for what they do? What you should be comparing is how does he do compared to Daniel Ricciardo? And his performances compared to Daniel Ricciardo are way off in terms of, Ricciardo was pushing Max Verstappen for poles and, for points in the races. They were fighting and challenging together in races, where Albon currently is absolutely nowhere near that. But I think we move on to, before we talk about, well, actually, let's talk about the race winners, Mercedes. It looks like they fixed their gearbox issue from last week that caused them a little bit of troubles. Bottas starting P4, it was never probably going to be the easiest race for him to challenge Lewis, and if Lewis got a good start and there weren't any mechanical issues, it was always probably going to be Lewis Hamilton's race. But that W11 just looks dominant, and it probably looks like the title fight is going to be between Hamilton and Bottas.
Yeah, and in all honesty, that's pretty much what we were expecting from testing, wasn't it? It was one of those where it did seem as if Mercedes had taken another step forward in terms of performance out of a fixed set of regulations. We know that Hamilton is always going to be in and around the top 2-3 places in a championship if you give him a car that is able to perform at that level. Over the course of a season, can we see Bottas competing at this moment in time? There's not enough drivers with cars that will challenge that Mercedes to say that they're going to take enough points off of him. So, yeah, we're definitely going to end up with Hamilton, Bottas challenging for the title, with Verstappen hanging on as long as possible if performances don't change.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all we kind of, that's all we can hope for, is that Red Bull hold on, and maybe with some upgrades. I don't really know whether losing out on the pace. I don't know. Obviously, Red Bull spoke about having their own DAS system. I don't know if that's going to close the gap at all in advantage, but that Mercedes just still looks comfortably quicker than Red Bull. And unfortunately, when I spoke about the season preview with Aldas, he was saying that Red Bull can't afford to be slow out the blocks and develop through the season. This is their season where they've got a chance. They've got to grab it with both chance, and obviously in a Grand Prix that they're usually strong at, getting no points week 1, and it was damage limitation, I suppose, in week 2. But Mercedes, it's definitely full advantage with Bottas in there. But I think we'll move. Diana Troy and Praka Patel both mentioning stuff in the comments around about Ferrari. I wonder if there'll be any more fisticuffs at Ferrari before the season's over, and you've got to feel bad for Vettel. Let's talk about that incident. So the incident it's the first lap. Sebastian Vettel hasn't had a great start. He's fighting for positions. They're coming into turn 3. He has the inside line. Charles Leclerc goes for a move on the inside on his teammate, bumps over the curb, flies over the top of the rear of Sebastian Vettel's car, takes out his rear wing, damages his floor in doing so, which eventually leads to, at the end of lap 2, both Ferraris are retired and out of the race. So, that was a really poor day at the office for Ferrari, wasn't it?
It was, and the one thing we can say on that is Leclerc's move there was very similar to the move that Vettel made last week on Carlos Sainz, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. See, same track, and you then start confusing things. But yeah, there was never any space there. It was always going to close on him, and he is one of those drivers that is always hard on himself. But I think it's getting to a point of being hard on yourself's got to stop, and you've then got to start thinking about when you're going to make moves in races. He is a very good driver, but there's always a mistake in Leclerc. Sometimes you get in races where it's not going to be compounded, but then you have like today where it has resulted in both drivers being out of the race.
Yeah, Viandra's just jumped in probably at the worst time for him, obviously being a Ferrari fan and talking about this Ferrari incident. But Yeah, Charles Leclerc, I think we forget how young he is. He had one season Alfa Romeo, then he made the big jump up to Ferrari. He had a very good debut season with Ferrari last year, but it wasn't, mistakes weren't kind of not included in that. And then this season, fantastic performance last week. I think we're going to see with Charles Leclerc, he's a couple of years behind in the development of where Max Verstappen is, in terms of, Max Verstappen would have these outstanding performances and then do some things that make you bash your head against the wall and go, what are you doing? You're so much better than that. And look, Charles, it's the first lap in a team that's struggling. He just kind of needs to get through the teammate, and taking out your own teammate, it's never good. And as much as what people will say Brazil 2019 was Sebastian Vettel's fault, fair play to him, he was coming out apologising pretty soon afterwards for what he did, but it's in an already very difficult situation for Ferrari, and looking at a very difficult season with their engine being off the pace. It pretty much to me seems like it was making things very difficult. As much as he was a hero last week, he certainly became the villain this week.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Ferrari have a new floor this weekend?
They did, and a new front wing.
Yeah, so that when you are in a position like Ferrari are at the moment, saying that they are so far off of the pace, and especially compared to where you would expect them to be, you wouldn't be looking at it saying, yeah, they're going to be one of the top teams, but you'd be close to. If you're trying to make up that time, you need laps on the board. We were saying it last year about Williams, the consistency for them and the reliability was what allowed them to develop in some aspect. Unfortunately for them, it does appear that everyone around them has developed at the same sort of pace, so they're still quite far off. But having a full race today, considering it was the same track as last week, would have given them a lot of information regarding the floor and the wing that they'd put on.
Yeah, it was very frustrating. They've kind of brought these kind of new updates there, and that I think they'd already written off the first half of the season. But you're right. This was definitely a day that they could have really brought in some data and understood their upgrades and understood what's going wrong with the car to at least damage limitation for this season, because obviously the rules are frozen the same for the 2021 season. It certainly would be something that that they definitely were looking to build on and try and drive forwards, but unfortunately they weren't able to do that today. Praka Patel, that Ricciardo performance was commendable. The pink Mercedes just a bit too much for the Renault from the looks of it. But yeah, I think Esteban Ocon didn't necessarily do great. He's struggling, I think, a little bit with his return to F1. Ricciardo much quicker on the medium compound. I don't know how early the cooling issues or overheating issues stuck in for Esteban Ocon, but from the start he wasn't really on Daniel Ricciardo's pace, who is on a harder compound to his teammate. But Daniel Ricciardo's performance definitely was a very good performance. Agree, Ash?
Yeah, Daniel Ricciardo did really well this weekend as a whole. It would have been nice to have seen him be able to battle more consistently, because I do feel there were times where the racing points sort of just swamped him. And then obviously the move with Lance Stroll at the end, which, yeah, you can't really fault him for that at all. But he is doing well in the Renault, and he will be looking forward to next season and getting his hands on that McLaren.
Yeah, it certainly. I think we spoke about it in the stream. I don't know, yesterday or last week, that Daniel Ricciardo is definitely looking the best out of those young guys well, not the young guys, but the guys who have made the switches for the 2021 season. His move to McLaren certainly looks like the best suited at the moment, because Ferrari is a flip of a coin. I just can't see them fixing their engine until the 2022 season, which is big issues for them, and obviously their customer teams Alfa Romeo and Haas as well. But yeah, I think the Renault is surprisingly a better performance, and although it may not be on the level, it's probably just below the McLarens and the Racing Points. It certainly is ahead of the Ferrari currently for me. So I definitely think they've got the fifth quickest car on the grid, which is still pretty good for Renault. And the early signs, obviously, the big news was Fernando Alonso has made a return to F1 with Renault for the 2021 season, and apparently rumours already coming out that he's saying bin off the 2021 season, don't care about that, we're focusing all on 2022 and making sure we absolutely nail the regulations for that. So it's going to be interesting, but they definitely have a good platform. Just going on chat, obviously talking about Perez's good performances apart from that move on Albon. I've only seen one or two replays on Albon. It just looked like Perez made a lunge, bit ambitious. Perez was ahead in the corner, and Perez probably looked like he put his front nose in where it was a risky place, and he wanted to try and make the move. But like I said, I think he'd been in the DRS zone for a long time with Albon, hadn't quite made the move. Coming to the last lap, I think it was more of a statement overtake rather than being too worried about losing out on the points. At least Rick got some points there from there. Why talk a lot about Alonso now, Mike? Obviously, Fiandra on that one on that front, but I think we've mainly covered it. We'll talk about George Russell actually, because I think a lot of people thought with George Russell starting in P11, this might be the race that he actually gets to get some points. But very early on, he was fighting, he was battling, he looked in good positions. He was fighting with with Pierre Gasly, and who else was he? Was it the McLaren of Lando Norris? I couldn't remember who he was on the back of. Certainly.
I don't know who he was on the back of, but yeah, it was Kevin Magnussen that he was battling with when he went wide. I'm not sure who he was with at that point.
It was unfortunate for when he did go wide, but still, finishing ahead of Latifi, I don't know what that says about Nicholas Latifi rather than George Russell, but I suppose the Williams look competitive in the hands of George Russell, and not like competitive like the Renault's, Racing Points and Alfa Romeos or even Ferraris when they finish the race. But if some circumstances come their way, they certainly look like they can battle the Alfa Romeos and Haas's, which is obviously a lot better than what they were last year. And it's not still ideal, but it's definite progress, it looks like, for Williams.
Yeah, and that's all that was really needed to see some form of progress. If you go through the whole of last season, they had Hungary where George Russell got close to getting out of Q3. And that was really about it in terms of qualifying. And then in the races, it was just waiting for cars to retire for them to make up the majority of the positions. So at least now you can see Russell getting into a battle and then being able to stick with it for a few laps at least. So hopefully it's a turning point for them and Russell's points will come.
Yeah, I'm hoping that he does look like that. Hopefully Williams can get some points this season, and if they, I think there's definitely the possibility of finishing 8th or 9th in the constructors. Haas definitely look the weakest team for me. I think we'll probably talk about them, but interesting message from Josh in the chat. No further action on Stroll. He's avoided penalty for that move on Daniel Ricciardo, which obviously is very good for Racing Point. But Josh said it kind of opens maybe a little bit of Pandora box, because he thought it was obviously pretty cut and dry. Lance went off track, forced Ricciardo off track. But yeah, he's managed to keep that position. I don't know if they were just going, it's racing. We're gonna let people kind of fight and race hard on track, but it within the rules, it probably looked like it probably should have been a penalty.
Yeah, I, as I said, I was leaning more towards should have had a penalty for that. But as I said, last lap of the race, potentially them looking at things, just saying we'll let it go. But it's one of those like Leclerc's moves on Hamilton at Monza last year, where it now does lean towards drivers will probably look at that and say, well, if he can do that, then I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive in the moves.
Yeah, and I've got Blue Flag Alpha's clearly feeling a little bit low. I mean, I can't say that he said it. I think it was a boring race. They're going, look, we've had 7 months without racing, and was it as good as last week's race? No. Did we have some amazing on-track battles in that race? Absolutely yes. I think to call it boring is maybe a little bit harsh on the race. I quite enjoyed the race, as a whole, and it was certainly one there. Obviously, I think probably it's the predictability of the podium always, I think, probably turns people off. And with how good that Mercedes looks, it does look like Lewis Hamilton is going to go. But I would just say, look at the midfield, guys. How good does that midfield look like it's going to be? Because Ferrari is back to get up to some sort of level. We could essentially have a four-way fight in the midfield between Racing Point, McLaren, Renault and Ferrari, which it'll be incredible to watch, wouldn't it?
It would be, and the unfortunate thing is, if Ferrari get the package together, you know that they'll make up points quite quickly over the other teams because they will be able to get into the podium positions and battle consistently at that end of the grid. But I want to see someone like a McLaren or a Racing Point stay there till the end of the season because it'll be good for Formula One. It's one of those where we've had so many years of predictability in terms of saying Mercedes is going to be on the podium with a Ferrari or a Red Bull, depending on what track we've been at. And now we're in a position, mainly because of this extended break that we've had, and teams realizing that, yes, we're going to have races added every so often, but we don't know how many races we will have long term this year, that they're going to be wanting to as possible where they can. I think we are seeing that in some of the moves. Like, if we were to be in this position, if we were in this same sort of time of the season last year, would Perez have gone for that move on Albon? I'm not too sure on it. I think he would have held back and just been like, well, best of the rest finished. That's good for me. So, yeah, we've got a lot of unknowns that are leading towards some really good racing going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've just seen from Tonka Toy Truck, hi to Nathan Adaboy in the chat. Thank you for joining in. McLaren plus Mercedes-Benz engines equals Red Bull headache. Potentially, because McLaren have a very good understanding of that car in the hands of Lando Norris. Daniel Ricciardo, we already know, is a top level driver. Sergio Perez, I still think Racing Point are probably going to be a headache for Red Bull, certainly for Alexander Albon, because let's be honest, if Sergio Perez had that pace and qualified in the top 10 in normal conditions outside of the rain and didn't have the first half of the race getting on the back of Alexander Albon's gearbox, you have to say you probably would have backed Sergio Perez to have got past Alexander Albon in the race. And so, yeah, I think that combination with McLaren and Mercedes engine is going to be really intriguing, and obviously, was very successful through the late 90s and 2000s, that partnership with the Mercedes-Benz engine. So I think that's probably one of the most fascinating things going into the 2021 season, with how good McLaren look like they're starting to go back up on the rise to a team that they were at the start of last decade in the 2010s.
One thing to put out on that while we're talking about that midfield battle, Sergio Perez, does he deserve another shot at a big team?
I think his chance has gone, and I don't think he would necessarily want it. I don't know actually, because he's 30, Sergio Perez, and obviously Lewis Hamilton moved to Mercedes when he was 29, was it?
Yeah, something, it was around that sort of age.
Yeah, so he's not too old, and he certainly has the experience, and the performances that he's putting in the Racing Point certainly won't be going amiss from those top teams. He's finally getting that competitive car to prove himself. But the question is, does he ride the storm out on Aston Martin? And are we talking about Aston Martin being challengers at the top in a couple of years' time? I don't know. I think, for me personally, I see Sergio Perez staying at Racing Point / Aston Martin for his F1 career, and then when he loses that seat or he decides to retire, whichever comes first, I can see Sergio Perez being here for the rest of his career.
Yeah, it's just he would do a good job for Red Bull in that second seat.
He certainly would do. But we know Red Bull very rarely, for such a long time, haven't gone side at their academy. I'll probably throw it back to you. They've said no for definite, but we said yesterday in the stream, whenever Red Bull say no, it doesn't necessarily mean no. If Alexander Albon performs like how he did today for the rest of the season, do Red Bull get Sebastian Vettel?
I would say no, and for the main reason that Vettel in that car, there would be fireworks. Him and Verstappen would not get on as teammates because they are both number one drivers. And that's the issue Ferrari had last season, that in terms of the performances they were having, Leclerc and Vettel should have been considered equals, and that was never going to happen. You're not going to dislodge Max Verstappen from that number one seat at Red Bull. And I don't think Vettel's going to be in a position where he's going to want to go to a team and be considered the second driver.
Yeah, that's probably a fair shout, and probably on there, which then for me puts Red Bull in a difficult situation, because Pierre Gasly looks like he's performing again in the Alpha Tauri, although their switch to hard tyres really backfired today. He just couldn't get the performance out of those tyres, which meant that he finished outside the top 10 after having a very good qualifying performance. But even at the start, we've seen that Alpha Tauri is just it's in its kind of league of its own. It's quicker than the Alfa Romeos, the Hasses, the Williams, but it's nowhere near the Renaults, Ferraris, Racing Points, and McLaren. So it's a little bit of a difficult situation for AlphaTauri, and a bit of a stalemate for Kvyat and for Gasly. It seems perfect for their juniors coming through, but it doesn't really seem kind of go from there. I think a lot of people saying Perez to a top team after we kind of talked about that, or Abe saying a return to Daniel Kvyat. I mean, I really can't see Red Bull. I mean, it's unlucky because they promoted Max Verstappen ahead of Daniel Kvyat when he probably didn't deserve to be dropped. He'd obviously had that incident with Vettel, wasn't it? But the previous weekend he'd got a podium, and he's been the most successful of the drivers, other than Daniel Ricciardo, of course. But that's never going to kind of go back, Daniel Ricciardo and Red Bull. So out of Gasly, Albon, and Kvyat's probably been the best out of the lot. But I just can't see it for Kvyat ever returning to Red Bull. Can you?
No, not after some of the comments he made after Albon getting promoted last season. I think bridges were burnt there. Yes, he probably is the one that's performing most consistently, but I still think Gasly is the one who will eventually end up in that Red Bull seat. It's just when's the right time for him to get that opportunity.
He certainly would have learned a lot from that first time round, and if his AlphaTauri performances continue like they have been, I know obviously today it didn't work out, but for much of the weekend he looked like he had the marks ahead of his teammate. But the problem is Red Bull have is that Gasly and Verstappen differ so much in driving styles that he may go back into that Red Bull car and be good in the AlphaTauri like he's been again, but go back into that Red Bull and be poor again because he doesn't drive, the car isn't set up or isn't built around his liking, and they can't build two separate cars for two different drivers, and that's the main asset that Alexander Albon has. But Alex Albon at the moment, he hasn't had a good weekend, and he's going to need to bounce back strongly at Hungary. But we'll throw it into the chat if there's any other questions you want from me and Ash. Otherwise, we're rounding up to the hour mark, and it would probably be a good point to kind of round off, as we'll have the race review podcast for a bit more detailed chat on the Tuesday coming out. But yeah, any questions in the chat? Lundgaard should join Red Bull. Well, it'd be interesting. I mean, the Renault Academy drivers certainly don't have anywhere to go, and Lundgaard, if he gets the super license points, comes into question. But I'd be very surprised if that move happened. But yeah, Tonka Toy Truck was talking on the Red Bull discussion. It is going to Red Bull going to continue in search of the next Verstappen, and that's not Albon or Kvyat. That's probably a fair shout on that one, but it looks like it probably is rounded off in chat on that one. I haven't really seen any questions coming through, here's the last one for you. Abe Pandya, where is Seb going to end up, Ash?
Personally, I think he'll end up going into a different category. It's one of those where F1 drivers do it quite regularly and then are always able to come back. Like Raikkonen's done it, Alonso's done it now. Give him a year away, and we're in a position where we were last season, where we were saying, oh, you're going to be waiting to see all of the changes for the 2021 regs. But with them being put on hold, we're now going to have everyone trying to get in position for 2022. So don't be surprised if he takes a year out and then he is back at a team in time for the regulation changes.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, and I think Seb probably needs a break from F1. I think that relationship at Ferrari's been very intense, and obviously it was his dream to be successful Ferrari, and it hasn't really worked out how he really wanted it to go. So yeah, I think he'll be a break would be good. Maybe a year in IndyCar might be something quite interesting to see Sebastian Vettel do. I know the Americans would absolutely love him to go to IndyCar, and it would certainly be an interesting one to see if Sebastian maybe pursued, and it would certainly help with his family. I don't know if they'd want to relocate to the States for a year, but IndyCar's a lot more relaxed, and he would get to spend a lot more time with his family, which I know is obviously a very important thing to Sebastian Vettel. We've had from Tonka Toy Truck, who will be strong in Hungary? For me, Mercedes will most likely finish 1-2, bar any weather or kind of mechanical issues. Max Verstappen will probably finish in P3. Then it will probably be the Racing Points, McLarens and Renaults in some form. With Albon probably ahead of them, and Ferrari will be somewhere. But I very much see it being how the teams have gone already. What do you think, Ash?
Personally, Hungary's downforce dependent, so the chassis on there is good enough to compete at any track. So it'll be Mercedes and Verstappen. Probably going to be Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas as a podium. And I think the McLaren's got the better chassis out of that next three. So I'll go with the McLaren's, followed by potentially the Renaults. The Racing Points seem good in straight line speed, but I'd say that they're in the middle of that three in terms of chassis and downforce. So,
Yeah, Racing Point certainly have got this short-term fix, shall we say. It was obviously meant to just be a short-term fix for the 2020 season and all focus on 2021, but even more so now, short-term fix for the 2020-2021 season, and all their kind of brainheads, they're kind of guys who are really good at managing their resources and building a great car in front of that, will certainly be focusing on 2022, making sure that Aston Martin aim to kind of be on top with the new rules and regulations. Ahmed Khan's just joined into the chat. It was Lewis Hamilton who won the race, and yes, the race is over. A few people talking about Sebastian Vettel retiring, potentially retiring, but I don't think he's done with racing. I think maybe going to another series, like we said, was probably on that front. But is there any other questions from you guys in the chat for me and Ash? If not, we'll round off today's stream there. I'll leave it a few moments to allow people to go. But overall, I think I really enjoyed that race. Ash, what about yourself?
yeah, we need to get back to that battling throughout the race. We sort of settled into how the last couple of seasons have gone, where we have that middle lull where people are managing tyres. So hopefully we'll be able to get to a stage where people don't worry about tyres and just decide, let's have some fun.
Yeah, and I think for me, it again, the Sky coverage is getting better, but unfortunately they were showing battles in the back of the midfield that weren't for points. And we hardly saw any of Perez's fight with Albon when he was in the DRS zone, and we did manage to catch the kind of Stroll, Ricardo, Norris, but it was a little bit jumpy all over the place. So I think that will certainly help for the entertainment of the races, but I don't think realistically, unless there's issues with that Mercedes, we're going to get too many battles at the front, which will be a shame because unless we have a Bottas and Hamilton qualifier on the front grid together and Mercedes letting them battle, that'll probably be it. But anyway, guys, that's it from us on the stream. Just as Liam talks F1 back with his phone charger come back on. Sorry, Liam, just as you've come back, we've decided we're going to end the stream. I hope you guys all enjoyed that. Obviously, it's a triple header. The triple headers seem to be the thing in 2020. So we're going to a different track. We're going to Hungary. Obviously, last year it was Max Verstappen versus Lewis Hamilton. The first kind of proper battle between them. I'm not sure in the terms. The Red Bull seemed a lot closer to Mercedes than it was at this point last year. Well, last year compared to this year. So we'll see how that one pans out. But hopefully we get another competitive race on a new track. But that's it from us today, guys. So it's bye from Ash.
See you later, guys.
It's bye from me. And for now, you F1 fans, keep racing. And classic thing, I had to turn the thing. So just keep racing. See you later, guys. And that